Okay. Great, so people are joining. While we are waiting for the others, I would like to see the geography of our webinar. If you don't mind, please. Please write the place where you are listening to us from in our chat. Okay, Lviv, Dnipro, hi. Frankfurt, great, Germany, Kiev, Verdansk, great. Dnipro, hi, Sofia, Bulgaria, great. Glad to see you. Khmelnytsky, great. Hi. Vilna, Luhansk, super. Kherson, Donetsk, Vinnytsia, great. Zaporizhzhia, Pereyaslav, Egypt. Nice to see you here.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Yes,
How
please.
are you?
Good evening, good afternoon.
As you see here.
Okay. So guys, if you don't mind, I will mute everybody for not to have background noise, okay? We'll communicate with you using our chat today. Hi, hello, Dnipro. Kharkiv, super. Okay. So let's wait for 1 more minute, maybe more people will join us. Okay, so far we have 46 people for now. Kiev. Okay, so almost the whole Ukraine, yes, and other countries as well are present. Great, nice to see you. Okay, guys, I guess we can get started. My name is Alessia. I'm a teacher here at Great Education Center. So I'm more than happy to see you here today, and I'm going to talk about giving feedback. I will try to tell you why we need it, when to give it, and how to do that, and to give you some practical recommendations on that. So today I'm gonna speak about what feedback is. I will go through the tips on how to make the feedback constructive, actually mentioning the different types of feedback as well. And at the end of our webinar, you will be able to ask your questions. I don't have any assistance today, so it is possible that I might not see your comments or your questions during the presentation. So I will ask you to remember your questions and feel free to ask them at the end of our webinar, okay? So before we start discussing what the feedback is, I want you to look at the quiz developed by Grant Wiggins, and I want you to write in the chat the number of comments you consider to be feedback. So please read attentively. If you think with one of them is feedback, write me the number of it. Please do. Mm-hmm. 1 and 3, great, okay. 3, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. 1, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Any other ideas? 1, 2, 1, 4. Okay, all of them good. Okay. No other ideas? That can be different. Okay. Okay. Actually, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So the quiz was a bit tricky because actually none of these statements is feedback. Let's look at them and think about why we can't consider these to be feedback. So let's first think about sentences number 1 and number 4. Please think what is wrong with these statements and why you can't consider these to be feedback. So number 1 and number 4, why these are not feedback. Okay, so not constructive, but still a reaction. Okay. Okay, so number 1, number 4, why not? Number 1, number 4, why not? Very personal. Okay, good idea, Olga. Yeah. No clues of what needs to be improved and how. Okay. For your opinion, good. Not specific, but still there is a praise. Okay. Okay. Anything else about 1 and 4? So yeah, I would agree with you guys. Very good. So this is very subjective. Yes. So shallow without any details on how to improve it further. Yeah. So I would say that number 1 and number 4, they express personal liking. Yes. And this is too subjective to be feedback. And it actually has nothing connected, as you write, that there is nothing connected with performance of a student, yes, or you don't actually please the students with the right goal. Okay, what about number 2 and number 3? What is wrong with these 2 sentences? I think. Okay, 2 generic. Okay, suggestions for improvement only. Okay, part of feedback, yeah. Quite vague, okay, not constructive. Okay, any other ideas? Not specific, don't know how to improve, okay. Don't express details about what to improve, good. So yeah, very close. So I would say that these look like more like pieces of advice, yes, or recommendations for further actions, but recommendations and pieces of advice, this is a bit different. It's not actually feedback. Good, thanks for that. And only criticism, okay, no positive side. Okay, yeah, good idea, good. Okay, so what is feedback? So now I want you to think, how would you explain what is feedback? What is your opinion? What is it? So write me a definition in your own words, okay? So what is feedback? Review, okay. Constructive opinion, constructive praise, mistakes, correction, recommendations, okay. Balanced review, good. Evaluation made clear to person who did this work. Critical analysis. Balance of good and what should be improved. Very good idea. Super. Summarize the result of the work the person has done. Okay, so this is the reaction to the actions. Yes. Assessment. Okay. Constructive comments. What is good and what could be improved. Okay. Strengths, weaknesses. Mistakes or difficulties. Good. Information you get from students. Okay, good. It's a response. Commentary, verbal, written, formal. Good, very good. Conclusion about lesson. Okay. Assessment, helpful information, oral comment. Okay, analysis. Good. Okay, so we will again speak about Wiggins, and Wiggins states that feedback is the most powerful tool we can use in our classroom to help our students improve. And it's also information about how students are doing in their efforts to achieve a goal. And this is one of the key points here. So what I mean, is your student able to ask for directions? Is your student successful at a small talk? Or are you able to participate in classroom discussion and state your opinions, and so on? And finally, it's not a value judgment or a piece of advice. This is where feedback actually differs from assessment, because it's not about grades your students receive for their work, but about their ability to use language, to understand, and to be understood. So it's more about the effectiveness of communication than just the number of mistakes your students make. And this is what we have to keep in mind when we actually give feedback. Our goal is to help students communicate in English. So now I want you to think about what types of feedback you use in your lessons. So there are no correct or incorrect answers. So I want you to just write what comes to your mind, okay? Content and language feedback, delayed, good. Good job. Delayed and instant, okay. Written and oral, good. Comprehension, achievement. Continuous, okay. Achievement of task, feedback on accuracy, fluency, good. Language and content, okay. Fluency, accuracy. Evaluative. Elective. Good. Positive, negative, super. Teacher student feedback, okay. The end of every lesson, yeah. So language feedback, okay. Okay, any other ideas which were not mentioned? Oral, descriptive, evaluative, oral, stickers, yeah. Yeah, they do work. Good. Formative, summative, yeah. Oral comments, self-reflection, good. To get feedback for students, yeah. Okay. Okay, super. So actually, when it comes to feedback, there can be tons of different types of it. That's why it's definitely impossible to cover all types of feedback on one or in one webinar. That's why I've decided to focus on only 6 types of feedback today. And why exactly these types? In my humble opinion, this is the basics of giving feedback in an English lesson. And the things we are going to focus on today will really allow you to improve your feedback and make it as student-friendly as possible. So what are the types we are going to discuss today? This is second, feedback on content and feedback on language, immediate feedback and delayed feedback, and peer feedback and teacher feedback. So we will start with feedback on content and feedback on language. Now I want you to think about these two and write me what you think is the main difference between these two types of feedback, feedback on content and feedback on language. Relevant and steps. Responding to content. Okay. By the teacher, well, feedback on content can be peer feedback. Okay. Interesting idea. Okay. So what is the difference between feedback on content and feedback on language? What the student says and how the student says. Very good. Content has been done already. Language using grammar. Yeah. Overall opinion. Someone's body language during presentation. Okay. Content understanding, language accuracy. Okay. Different purposes. Yeah, of course. Comprehensions and proficiency. Good. Okay. Language correcting grammar and syntax errors in written. Okay, good. Content, how accurate it was. Language, how that content is used by the student. Okay. So I would get stuck to what Alena said. So the content, this is what the student said, yes, and the language, this is how the student said that. I agree with that. So feedback on content, this is actually validating what your students have just done and taking it beyond just being something they did because you told them to do that. So what is important here? It is really important to set up a task correctly because the students have to understand what they are going to be required to give so that they pay attention to those things during the task. In other words, when given instructions for a speaking task, a teacher should articulate what the feedback on the task will be. For example, the task can be discuss the questions and think about what you have in common. So the feedback will be what you have in common with your partner. Yeah? Or tell your partner about how you spent the summer holidays, for example, and if you had any similar experiences. So the feedback will be similar experiences. Or, for example, what else can be? Tell your partner about something, yes, and be ready to tell me what were the 2 most interesting facts you've heard about your partner. So this will be what they are going to tell you about. And in this case, why it is also important to set the task accurately? Because in this case, you actually give the students a real reason for communication. And in this case, they will listen to each other, and you change actually the meaningless speaking into real communication. So it will also be a good idea to let your students know if they are allowed to write down, for example, the answers, or they have to remember everything. So it will help them to understand what actually they have to do. So make the task engaging for your students. What I mean here. So it is a well-known fact that people like it when others ask for their attitudes and their opinions, and when you actually let them express their opinions. That's why it is a good idea to use this fact when designing tasks for your students. And for example, you can ask them, describe to your partner the house of your dreams. And when listening to your partner's description, think about whether you would like to live in such place or not, and why. So your students will listen to each other, and they will think, and they will actually give you feedback on their opinions, on their attitudes to that. And you also should remember that when giving feedback on content, it's not necessarily that you ask all students to tell about what they discussed in breakout rooms, if it is online, yes, or in pairs, if it is in the classroom. So in this case, you can ask just a couple of students. And what helps you to understand who might give you a good feedback? This is monitoring closely, because when you monitor, you can actually understand who is likely to have something to say and whose answer might be interesting for the whole class to hear. So speaking about feedback on language, you know that maybe one of the biggest students' requests is to be corrected more. Why? Because most of our students think that they are actually in the classroom because their teacher has to correct their mistakes. And they often don't understand why we don't correct all their mistakes. I hope that you don't correct all their mistakes. So in this case, we have to understand that our students have to benefit from our feedback. And that's why it is crucially important to understand the difference between mistakes and errors. So if you can, please write me, what do you think? What is the difference between mistakes and errors? Mistakes and errors. So it's okay. Right, okay. Any other ideas? Competence, mistakes more related to performance, okay. Prevent communication mistakes, don't, okay. You don't know something. Good. Good. Anastasia, I like your idea. Students make errors if they don't know something, yes, but mistakes if they know it but haven't practiced enough. Yeah, so actually mistake is a performance error. So what does it mean? The student already knows the structure or grammar rule or the word, but in this particular case, this student made this mistake. Maybe because of lack of practice, as Anastasia says, yes? But what is error? Error usually occurs on interlanguage level. What it means? That means that the student actually hasn't learned this rule or doesn't know this word, but they try to make a guess. And this guess is based on what they know already about English and what they know from their own language. And they actually try to create a like an English sentence using the knowledge from English and their own language. And this is the error. And why is it important to understand the difference between them? If you correct mistake, they understand the correction because they know already the rule. And when you explain their mistake, they understand what you want from them. But if they have an error, they don't know the rule, they don't know the word. So no matter how you try to correct it, they will not understand it, they will not benefit from it. And what is worse, they might be reluctant to speak next time because they think that you just criticize them and they don't want to be criticized anymore. So the next thing is that your feedback on language must be balanced. That means that you have to pay attention to meaning, form, and pronunciation. What we usually have in reality, we usually have the reality that teachers focus more on form, which is actually grammar correctness. So if a student makes a grammar mistake, teacher immediately tries to correct, to say what is the correct answer and so on, but they don't actually pay attention to the mispronunciation of the word, which is actually crucially important because the student not only says the incorrect word and remembers this incorrect pronunciation, but all the other students in your classroom also listen to this incorrect or mispronunciation, let's say, and they remember it. So this is why it is important to pay attention to pronunciation as well. And secondly, when we learn or when we teach grammar, it is also crucially important to pay attention to pronunciation because our students are usually, they speak like robots, you know, and very often even native speakers say that our students sound impolite just because we don't pay enough attention to intonation, to sentence stress, and we don't correct these mistakes. And that's why our students, like, they know how to say that grammatically correctly, but they don't know how to pronounce it correctly for to be understood by native speakers. And the meaning here, we speak more about appropriateness because very often there are some words which can have more than one meaning or which have like the same meanings. For example, if we say a word chair, it is really difficult to misuse it. Yes, we understand what is chair and we definitely, he sits on the chair or like he is sitting on the chair or something like that. But if, for example, we speak about words historic and historical, if we speak about Ukrainian language, yes, we can translate it the same into our language, but the use in English is different. So our students have to understand how to use these two words appropriately in their sentences. They have to understand those specifics in the meanings of the words, and we have to correct this misuse and misappropriateness. So, and the last thing is that your feedback must be user-friendly. This is actually closely related to correcting mistakes. What I mean, imagine that you have A2 level students and he or she wants to use, let's say, conditional sentence in their speech. Of course, it is almost 100% that your student will make a mistake, right? But this is A2 level. How they made this sentence? They used their knowledge of their own language and they translated it into English. Imagine that you try to correct this mistake. Will your students understand your correctness, your corrections? Will they understand what you want from them? Of course not. They just don't have enough knowledge to get your corrections. So in this case, we have to understand that if the teacher tries to correct such things, the students will not benefit from it. It will not be user-friendly. It will be ineffective, actually. Besides, using specific feedback allows teachers to use less judgmental language, yes, and explaining a specific observation of an error pattern and giving like specific suggestions that will move the student closer to the target may make students more receptive to hearing your corrections, and you actually have to invite them for actions. You have to make them want to correct and to speak precisely. And this is important here, not to overwhelm them, for them not to feel like they are judged by your corrections. And if it is not user-friendly, they will feel like that. Okay, so the next pair, this is immediate and delayed feedback. So please think and write me what is the difference between immediate and delayed feedback. Okay. While speaking and at the end, okay. Right after a student has made a mistake and after an activity finished or in the next lesson. Okay. While speaking after the activity, speaking only delayed. Okay, agree. At the moment. Right after the speech. Immediate in a matter of seconds. Okay. I'm going. Relate next lesson. Personalized. On spot. Immediate. Okay. For fluency purposes. Immediate feedback is focused on some target language. Good. Mispronunciation. We shouldn't interrupt students. Okay. Okay. Example of immediate, it should be like this. Like what? Different aims, depends on what practice, accuracy or fluency. Okay, so we've already discussed the feedback on content. Yes, and when we speak about feedback on content, it is understandable that we give it immediately after the task. However, it's not so obvious when to give feedback on mistakes, like on accuracy, yes, and we always have such questions like, is it a good idea to postpone the correction until the end of the lesson, for example? Or is it better to interrupt a student when they are speaking? And if yes, if it is a good idea, should we interrupt them after every single mistake? So knowing actually when to give feedback is fundamental here. And timing is very relevant to how students will hold on to it and how they will process the feedback. Yeah. So I liked your answers. Actually, you paid attention that immediate feedback, this is definitely immediately after the word was or mispronounced or the grammar mistake was had a place. Yeah. And delayed feedback, this is a bit later, but I would disagree that it will be the next lesson. I would say that it will be more at the end of the lesson. You also wrote that immediate feedback, it's like within the seconds after the mistake. I wouldn't say that it is like the seconds. You can wait for your student to finish the sentence, for example, or the speech, and then to correct this mistake. So let's look closer at these two types. So one of you mentioned, or some of you mentioned about target language. Yes, so immediate feedback is definitely needed when students make mistakes in the target language. So it can be incorrect pronunciation of new words, or using wrong grammar structures, or using incorrect endings and so on. And why it is important? This is the new language. This is target language. And one person makes a mistake. Not only he will remember this mistake, but everyone will remember this mistake if you don't correct it immediately. So that is why it is crucially important to immediately react to mistakes connected with what you are learning in the lesson. However, it doesn't mean that you just say the correct pattern without focusing the student's attention to this pattern, actually. So frankly speaking, it's not really a good idea just to say the correct word or phrase, as it prevents students from analyzing the language. It is much better to let your students correct themselves, and this can be done in different ways. So let's look at this way. The first thing you can use is body language. I often use like my facial expression, like for example, I can move my eyebrow and my students understand that something was wrong. They will react to it because they understand that there was a mistake. So I also use with my A1, A2 students, for example, this gesture. I can show them the little finger because very often they forget about the ending S in present simple with he, she, it. Yes, he, speak, for example. I show like this and they understand that there was missing S at the end and they immediately react to what I show them and they correct themselves. And of course, you already mentioned that we don't only react to mistakes, but we also have to react to something good. And here body language is also very good. You can show thumbs up, you can nod, you can smile, and you show that you like what is said by your students. When you work online, for example, you can use smileys for that. For example, you can show a heart or a smiley, and your students understand that you react on what they are doing. So the second possible option is repetition, and here you actually repeat what exactly the learner said, but you somehow emphasize the mistake that learner has made. For example, your students say he speaks English well, and you repeat exactly what was said. For example, he speaks English well. But you could hear that I used my tone, I used my voice to show that something was wrong with the word speak. They understand it and they try to correct themselves. In this case, you don't provide them with the correct example. And you also can use recasting. So here you also actually repeat what the student produced, but you provide them with the correct answer. For example, your student says, I want it. And you immediately react and ask, what do you want to eat? So you already used to eat, yes? And they understand that they have to answer this question using want to. That they will say, I want to eat ice cream now, for example. So in this case, you not just repeat or show them the correct answer, but you make them produce this language using the correct pattern, which is crucially important as well. About delayed feedback, you already mentioned that we often use it when we have fluency activities or we have freer practice. In this case, we want to avoid interrupting, yes, because they have to focus on the message. Their main idea is fluency here, right? Not accuracy. Also, one more reason for using delayed feedback can be the mistake which is done by almost all your students. But it is also important that your students have already know the rules. For example, all of them say, for example, I like read in the evenings, or I like watch TV in the evenings. And you already know that they learned that we use ing after like. So, but this is the mistake for almost all of them, or for majority of them. In this case, it's a good idea to pay attention to this mistake. But as far as it's not a target language, it is like wiser to pay this attention to pay attention to this mistake at the end of the lesson. So it will be the delayed feedback. And again, it's bad idea just to correct your students. You have to make them think, you have to make them analyze. That's why you can use different techniques here as well. So the first one, metalinguistic feedback. By the way, if we speak about delayed feedback, I'm a big fan of using whiteboard, because we have students who have visual memory, and it's not enough for them just to hear the answer. It is important for them to see the corrections, and they will remember it better. So it's better to write. In metalinguistic feedback, what you actually do, you write down the sentences or the phrases, and you actually say that there is a mistake in every sentence. And you can ask them either correct by themselves, or I also prefer doing that in pairs or in groups. You can put your students in groups or in pairs, ask them to analyze together these sentences, and then you ask for feedback from them, actually, so they correct their mistakes themselves. The other possible option is clarification request. This is when you ask a student to correct a mistake and explain why. This is actually works very well when you work with grammar, but also you can use it when you work with vocabulary. In this case, I ask them to explain the meaning of the word. Or, for example, if there was used the incorrect word, I can ask to explain the difference between the meanings of these words. So in this case, I can definitely understand that they understand the correction, and they can explain why this must be used here. And the last one is output analysis. This is very good when you monitor your students and you write down the examples of not only mistakes, but also their good output. And then on the whiteboard, you write different sentences, mixing good sentences with mistakes. And again, you put them into groups or in pairs, and you say, okay, guys, here you have correct sentences and incorrect sentences. You discuss and you correct those which contain mistakes. In this case, what is good? In this case, they understand that you pay attention not only to their mistakes, but you actually see when they do something well. You pay attention to their achievements, and they really appreciate. Okay, and teacher and peer feedback, I guess you understand the difference between them. So what are the main aims of teacher feedback? The first and foremost, of course, this is providing feedback and feedback to their mistakes. what is the aim here? That they can correct themselves and they won't make these mistakes anymore. This is the crucially important here. And it's important for your students to understand that it is okay to make mistakes. I always say my students, if you don't make mistakes, you can come and teach me. So they have to feel free to make mistakes in your lessons. They have to understand that correcting mistakes and making mistakes is normal process in learning. So they have to feel safe in this, in this meaning, yeah? The other meaning of teacher feedback is acknowledging progress. This is also important that you pay attention not only to bad sides, but you actually react that, for example, students stopped making the same mistake, or they actually, if it is writing, that they started using specific structures, for example, or they started using linking words, and you acknowledge this, you pay attention to this, and you praise them. So they will be really thankful for that. And of course, providing encouragement, which is really, really important, because this actually will, when you provide them with encouragement, it's a high probability of better test results, of more active classroom participation, of high interest in general. And you have to remember that feedback is an integral part of a successful learning experience, and it helps teachers to connect with their students on deeper level and to build a solid foundation of trust and rapport. This is about teacher feedback, but what about peer feedback? So we remember that we always try to activate students' involvement in classroom participation. Yes, and also we can involve them in evaluation and assessment practices, which we call feedback actually. So this type of feedback requires learners to give and receive feedback as comments, for example, or as suggestions and corrections to their peers' performance. And the objective of peer feedback is to activate students as resources for one another in order to promote opportunities for improvement in their own performance. Put it simply, when providing feedback to their peers, your students improve their own performance as they analyze the language and correct mistakes, which promotes their own understanding and memorization, actually. So most often, peer feedback is used in speaking and writing activities. And in these cases, peer feedback activities are designed as communicative group tasks, where the students are assigned to provide and receive feedback from each other, actually. So, however, it's important to help students direct their attention to specific features and suggest solutions to identified issues. It's also important to remind students that feedback is not subjective judgment, but must be constructive and tolerant. So, to make peer feedback easier for students, it's important to make it organized. And for this, you have to provide them with checklists, marking guides, rubrics, and other feedback criteria to help them to understand what focus their attention on. For example, imagine that you asked your students to write an essay, and then you ask them to read each other's essay and give feedback on the essay. What will be the feedback actually? They will say you, okay, this essay was interesting and funny, but that one was boring. Can you imagine the feelings of the author of the second essay? Of course, they will not participate in writing anymore, or they will be reluctant to show their essays in the future, yeah? But if, for example, provide them with the checklist, which you can see on my slide, for example, this will help to avoid ineffective comments and to concentrate on precise issues. And such feedback will be constructive and tolerant enough. Okay, so let's conclude. What should we do to make feedback constructive? First of all, we have to set clear goals for students. And before your students begin work, you have to make sure you have explained what the learners' goals are and what are successful, like what will successful outcomes look like. So secondly, there must be balance between corrections and praise. So you have not only to focus on mistakes, but also on improvements and achievements of your students. And if your students don't associate your comments with failure, they won't be afraid of speaking. This is what you have to remember. In fact, feedback focused on both positive and negative aspects can facilitate better learning. So thirdly, you have to let your students speak. Of course, there are students who want you to correct their mistakes immediately afterward, but you have to remember that correcting your students every third or fourth word, they will not want to speak anymore, and they will be discouraged, and you will have really bad participation in your lessons. So you have to make sure that your correction is made timely so that your students definitely benefit from it. You also have to remember that correcting something that is absolutely unfamiliar to your student is meaningless and destructive. So if you give feedback on some issue, you have to be sure that it is something that your students have learned and can recognize and understand. And finally, don't be afraid to involve your students in giving feedback, because it will facilitate their awareness of language and also make them more involved and interested in the task. So that was actually the end of the presentation. And before we move to your questions, I want to know which ideas from our webinar were the most interesting for you, and you will definitely try to use that in your lesson. Please write your answers in our chat. Maybe what type of feedback you will use. I think we stick and pass. Discussing and pass. Your feedback. Your feedback, okay. Body language. Little finger. Present simple, yeah. Okay. Different mistake corrections, okay. Output analysis, repetition, recasting, good. Fusion body language. Okay. Content, language, praise, yeah. Feedback, okay. Okay, great, great. Thank you for being so responsive, for being so active today. Correct their mistakes, explain why. Yes, definitely. Good sentences with mistakes. Yes, good sentences work really well. Praising more. Constructive. Great. How to make recasting effective. Okay. So guys, if you have any questions, you're welcome to write them in our chat. Intonation, yeah. What could you recommend for situations when tasks for content feedback get repetitive? Sometimes students need to memorize. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so this is feedback on content. Yes, it can be, what can I use with my students? I can ask them, for example, remember the most shocking fact, or for example, which of the experiences, it depends of course on the questions, yes, but which of the experiences you would like to have, or for example, what I often use, what do you have in common with your partners, or which of your partner's ideas you found the most interesting, for example. So you have to play with, but of course it depends on the task, and you have to play what else you can ask them to do. Also, I can ask them, for example, to remember the facts about their friends, and then I put them into different paths, and they have to tell about their previous partners and find out what their previous partners had in common. So if you have enough time for speaking in this case, it also works well. Should we correct for most mistakes each time they appear, or is it meaningless? I would say if one of my students has such type of mistake, I correct him or her twice or 3 times. And then I just, again, I can use some gesture or facial expression, and the student already understands that he or she made the same mistake, and they try to correct themselves. If it is a mistake, like fossilized mistake, which all students have, yes, do it at the end of the lesson every time as delayed feedback until they stop making this mistake. Okay. Or is it a good idea to teach students to give sensitive feedback to each other when they give peer feedback for writing task? Yes, that is why actually, no matter how many times you will say them that you have to be tolerant, especially if these are teenagers, they won't. That's why it is crucially important to give them the checklist, what exactly they have to pay attention to, so that they have no chance to be intolerant and to like to be not sensitive to other students, for example. So, but it is important to teach them what actually feedback is, that it is not your judgment, this is not your subjective idea about something, yes, but this is what constructive information which you can give to your peer. So the more you do these tasks, the better they understand what you actually are waiting from them. They just say everything is good. Okay, I have one idea. If everyone says that everything is good, I say you can give one kick and you have to give one kick and 2 kisses. That means that they have to give 2 positive things and 1 negative thing, and this is a must. So they use it very well, actually. Where can I include emergent language? Was speaking on Zoom. What do you mean emergent language in this case, Ruslan? You can speak.
Yep, so just words that come out with just all the students just while they're speaking and don't know what is it called, and should I include it at the end in just
understand. This is actually more about micro teaching as far as I understand. Yes, when they work in pairs, in breakouts, for example, right?
Yep. So
yeah, I would say that this is micro teaching. So when you do monitoring, you also do micro teaching. So in this case, you just help them immediately and you don't put it in the delayed feedback.
Oh, okay, thanks.
What's your view on putting mistakes on a whiteboard? Should we do that? Yes, I mentioned that that it is a good idea to put on the whiteboard. Why? Of course, you don't put the names of the students, just the mistake. Why? Because we have visuals. We have people with visual memory, and it is crucially important for them not to hear but to see. So if you correct it on the whiteboard, they will remember it better. That's why I always do that in a written form. And not to memorize the wrong stuff. For not to memorize the wrong stuff, use the other color, brighter. For example, if you write the sentences in black, corrections must be done in green or blue or even red, doesn't matter, but for them to catch their attention with the other color and they will remember the correct form. Okay, so any other questions? No questions. Great. So guys, that was really my pleasure to work with you. Thank you for being so active. And so concerning certificates, they will be available in your GREAT account, but after a small test. So you will have to do a small test. It will be based on what we discussed today. And then you will be able to get your certificate. And the video of the webinar will also be available either in your GREAT accounts or in our GREAT University library, but it will be available tomorrow because we need some time to download it there. Okay. Okay, thanks for today's meeting. Hope to see you next time. Thanks. Bye, guys. Have a nice day.